Hi, David Taylor on Mr Pelargonium, back with another video for the Pelargonium and Geranium Society. Today it's the annual pot up of my 16-inch hanging basket, which I have on the east elevation of my garage, which is right next to my glass house here. So let's get on and do it. Hello there, well, welcome back to the channel. I thought I would sort of put this up again, although I did it last year. You could obviously go back and have a look at that one if you wish, but it's going to be more or less the same thing. This is a Pelargonium hanging basket, which is going to have a mixture of ivy leaf pelargoniums and dwarf zonals. It's going to be 3 of my own in there. We'll talk about those in a moment. But very basically, I'm going to be potting this up now. I'm filming this on the 16th of April, Sunday the 16th of April. This really is the time that you need to be doing it. And then maybe either keeping them in your glass house still, or maybe even sort of hanging them outside if they're in a relatively sheltered wall, if they're against a relatively sheltered wall, for instance. We've still another 5 or 6 weeks here in the UK where we could have a touch of frost. So you do need to be a little bit careful, but certainly against a wall, unless it was a hard frost, it would almost certainly be okay. Or you can keep it in your glass house until the sort of late May, early June period comes along. Now, the reason we're doing it now is to purely let the plants settle in and grow on a bit, so that by the time we get to that hanging out period, or the main hanging out period of the early summer, the plants are beginning to grow a bit. So I'm going to get right on with it. Now, this is a sort of 16-inch, a large metal basket. I've got a new liner in it. Now, a 16-inch liner, for whatever reason, is always just a tad too big. So what I have to do is just, by the time I put it completely round, it just pokes in a little bit. So we do need to overlap it slightly. So all I do is cut down this little bulge. Right, so I'm just sort of slicing this down just to create an overlap so that it neatly folds into the shape of the basket. Don't need to go down too far, probably going to do. So now you see I can just tuck that under and push that over it. And because that's supported, that's not going to sort of fall out. I've only gone down about 4 inches, I suppose, which is about 12 centimetres, and that's just overlapped that and allowed that to just sit there perfectly. Right, so I've got this liner which is lined up with the top of the basket, but got the overlap there. It's sat, obviously you need to sit it in a pot. Now I've got this in a bucket and it's a little bit slidey aroundy, but I think this is going to be fine. So usual open compost. You want an open compost. Now, the one thing that I am doing at the moment, I'm actually trialling a number of different compost types, and I'll talk about that in another video. So it's 5 parts of a peat-based compost with 1 part of perlite. There is in this compost quite a bit of sand that comes in the compost. It's all to do with cutting down the amount of peat that's in it. So there's a little bit of wood fibre in there. But there is quite a bit of silver sand, but that is really good for drainage and opening up the compost itself. But I add 5 parts of compost with 1 part of perlite. So that gives that little bit of extra drainage and a little bit of opening up of peat-based compost. Right, so I've got to within about 1 inch of the top, I suppose, 1 inch, 2 centimetres or so. Just give it a little prod to push it down a bit. Right, now I always use commercial ivy leaves for my baskets. This is a medio group of plants. These are Bull Colgrave, I think. Yeah, Bull Colgrave plants. This is the Medio group of ivy leaf, sort of relatively dwarf ivy leaves, but they will grow. I mean, the size and spread is sort of, up to 12 inches and a sort of space of around 14 to 18 inches. So they should get big. But the one thing with baskets is that you do need to pack them out. I've always said this, you want to get a lot of plants, well, a relatively lot of plants in a basket just to make it look really effective. Now that will mean that in the height of the summer you will need to be watering it fairly regularly, but the benefit of using pelargoniums, as many of you know, is that they do not need masses of water to enable them to grow well. So that's the key thing. Now I've got two of these, well, what's known as Gabray red, something along those lines, and I chose that colour because it's a fairly good match for Gosbrook Susanna, which I've got over here. I'm actually going to use this one. It's one of my own dwarfs. I'll tidy this up a little bit in a moment. But the colour looks fairly similar. Obviously, it's just a photograph, so we're not going to know exactly. But I'm just going to intermingle these. I've got two of these Gabray reds and two Loner whites. So it's going to be a red and white basket, basically. That's going to be the theme of it. Now, the key thing is we're going to push this out. Superb root system, as you would expect. These have almost certainly been grown on pretty decent environment, very controlled environment, which you would get. So I want these more or less around the outside. So I'm just going to stick those in, push it down, 1.5 inches from the outside, because I want these to sort of branch out. Basically, more or less one in each corner. We'll just put that label there so that we know where we are. Got a white one, this Loner white here. I'm just doing that on the quarter as well. So just push away. I mean, this is fairly common sense planting this. A little bit, push the compost away a bit. Push it down. We will backfill this to come up to the height of these plants in a moment. Superb root system, and it's grown on. They're just starting to get a little bit pot bound, I suppose you would say, but they're looking pretty good, to be honest. Right, okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to add, I think it's 2 Gosbrook Susannas and a Colin Martin, which is all white. I'm just going to tidy this up. I'm going to get rid of any sort of blooms. I mean, I've let a lot of these just bloom out, to be honest. I'll take off the reddening leaves. Now, these are fairly young. I mean, this is a July last year cutting, so it's about 9 months old. Stick this one, I think I'm going to go. So because I've got 3 of them and I've got 4 of those, I'm just going to push them slightly towards the outside in a triangle. So we'll push that one there. I mean, these will get fairly sizable, to be honest. Push that one there. I watered a couple of these last night. I like to tease the root. I'll just tease the root a little bit. And we'll put the other Colin Martin, the white, over here. So we're going to get a good burst of basically red and white. Now at the end of the season, of course, you can salvage these plants if you want to get them in, break them up. Well, you could even potentially, if you had the room, just bring the basket back in. Just get rid of the yellowing leaves. My bin down there. So yeah, I mean, you can bring them in, split them up. I may do that later in the season when we get to that time, which is almost a whole season ahead, September or October time. But just typically, I've just had a look at this Colin Martin of mine, and that is absolutely smothered in mealybug. So I'm going to have to abandon my plans on that. That plant is going to have to be dumped. For a young plant to be so smothered, I really can't use it. So that is going to have to be taken out. So I've now got to rethink my plans. Well, I've had to go and wash my hands. That Colin Martin was actually smothered in mealybug. Pretty bad. You may be able to see some signs of it there. I don't want to be touching it too much. You can see all that white powdery dew in there. That is all really bad, which is unusual. I don't know quite how that's happened. So what I've got one of my own Gosbrook snow caps, which is it's a white, virtually white, just a Vegas hint of pink. Mr Pelargonium, one of my older ones that I released. It was a sister seedling of Robin Louise. So that's going to have to replace my Colin Martin. Well, that's as clean as a whistle, thankfully. So that's good. Right, so that's going to go in the place of Colin Martin. Push that down, and that will branch over. And so that's more or less completing the plants that I want to put in here. Now, there's a lot of growth to go on with these. Certainly the ivies will flow from each corner. That's the general idea. And the two dwarfs and the Stella now will fill this central part. And we will monitor this as the time progresses. So let's just get the compost and just finish topping this up. All I'm basically doing is backfilling now into these gaps. I prefer to do it this way. I mean, you could sort of completely fill them up if you've got the room, and just move the compost around and just get your plants in, but I just prefer to sort of do it this way. Now, the one thing that I'm not going to do, you may be surprised, is not give it much of a water, if any. In fact, I don't think I'm going to give it any water, because most of these plants are quite damp. So I'm just filling in these gaps now. I generally don't keep the labels there. I just keep them for reference in a box here, because I know what's in here. Now, some of you may think that this is a fairly sparsely planted basket, but I've got 7 plants in here that will grow fairly large. So I'm not overly concerned. The thing is, I've done it relatively early. So certainly in 2 months' time, which is round about the middle of June, isn't it? It's, funnily enough, it's showtime. These will have grown on quite substantially. But the key thing, as I've always said in these early days of planting your basket, don't go over watering them. You just do not need to do it. Certainly ivies don't require it. They've got plenty of room in there to start getting their roots down. Now, as I say, what I will do on sort of warmer days, or certainly days when there's no hint of frost or anything, I will probably almost certainly put this outside. Primarily because I've not really got the room to hang it in here. I can hang it in here, of course, should there be an unusually cold night forecast. If after a few sort of waterings you see your level of compost has gone down, you can just top it up, of course. Relatively common sense. So I've got quarters for the ivies and a triangle of, what was originally meant to be zonals, but I've got 2 zonals and a Stella. Still the colour scheme. Snowcap is just off white, so it'll be fine. And there we are, that's done. As I've said, I do not think all of these plants were watered last night, so they were very damp, these plants that I put in here, and I'm not going to bother to water. They don't need it. And there we are, that's more or less done. So I can get this out. I will probably put it outside. It looks as if it's brightening up. Now this is going to be on an east facing wall. So it's going to get the sun in the morning, get sun up to probably about lunchtime, and then shaded in the afternoon. I think that's almost sort of ideal. I mean, the ivies can handle any sort of strength of sun really all day long, but that's the situation it's going to be in. And I had a lot of success last year with my basket. I think I said I'll post a picture if I haven't already done so. I'll post the picture of my basket from last year. But we'll monitor that again over the summer, much like we did last year, and see how this develops. So that's just about it from me today. I hope you enjoyed this little repeat performance of potting on a 16-inch hanging basket. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.